At the dawn of the Second World War, Nazi Germany faced an almost impossible problem. Their aircraft factories were racing against time, desperate to produce wooden warbirds faster than their enemies could shoot them down. But there was a silent killer in those production lines, not sabotage, not mechanical failure, but waiting for wood to dry. What once took 100 hours of patient, agonizing drying now consumed precious days that the Reich simply did not have. By war's end, German engineers had compressed this ancient process into mere hours, unlocking secrets so radical they seemed to defy the laws of physics itself. This is the story of how necessity became the mother of industrial revolution, and how a breakthrough that could have changed the world simply vanished. Welcome to the Lost Tactician, where we excavate the engineering decisions that determined the fate of empires. For millennia, woodworkers understood a fundamental truth. Patience was not a virtue, it was a requirement. Freshly cut softwood contains up to 200% of its dry weight in moisture. To use it in structures demanding precision and reliability, that water must leave. The traditional process was glacial. Air-drying softwood took weeks to months. Thick timbers could require years. The final reduction from 20% moisture content to the ideal 6 to 8% consumed more time than the entire initial drying period. By 1939, time was a commodity Germany did not possess. The Luftwaffe demanded wooden aircraft components at rates the natural world could not provide. The German equivalent to the de Havilland Mosquito was constructed largely from plywood and laminated spruce. Every fighter fuselage, every wing component, every structural beam depended on wood seasoned to precise specifications. Traditional drying was catastrophic to production schedules. For everyday timber spent in the drying yard, an airframe was not being assembled, was not shooting down enemy bombers, was not protecting German airspace. The economic mathematics were, well, brutal. Storage space was precious and energy resources were rationed for the war effort. German industrial planners understood something that had eluded peacetime manufacturers. Drying wood was not peripheral. It was actually the bottleneck that could determine industrial warfare itself. In research facilities across the Reich, engineers began experimenting with ways to accelerate what nature, honestly, accomplished with glacial slowness. The solution did not come from a single eureka moment, but from radical refinements attacking the problem from multiple angles. The first breakthrough involved reconsidering fundamental heat transfer. Traditional kilns had relied on passing heated air parallel to the wood surface, essentially blowing warm wind across timber and hoping moisture would eventually escape. German engineers realized this was, well, profoundly inefficient. They developed perpendicular airflow technology. Instead of air moving alongside the wood, it was forced directly through the grain, perpendicular to the surface. Heat transfer efficiency increased exponentially. Moisture removal shifted from slow diffusion to something closer to extraction. But heat alone was insufficient. German researchers combined perpendicular airflow with high-temperature, steam-tight kilns operating at 240 to 250 degrees Fahrenheit, intensities earlier kilns barely maintained. The chambers were engineered with unprecedented insulation, becoming pressure vessels containing both heat and saturated steam. Within this environment, water evaporation dynamics fundamentally changed. The steam atmosphere prevented the wood surface from drying too quickly, which would cause checking and warping. Simultaneously, elevated temperature forced internal moisture outward. The entire process became orchestrated, molecular-level extraction rather than patient waiting. The numbers seem almost impossible. What required over 100 hours of kiln drying could now be accomplished in 3 to 6 hours. Softwood veneers emerged from these kilns in states of perfect dimensional stability, rivaling traditional seasoning. The accelerated wood retained structural integrity that centuries of practice had insisted was only possible with slow aging. German engineers went further still. For critical applications, they employed vacuum drying technology. Under reduced atmospheric pressure, water's boiling point plummets. Water that normally boils at 212 degrees might boil at 120 degrees or lower. This meant drying could occur at reduced temperatures, minimizing cellular stress while maintaining speed. Some experimental processes incorporated chemical accelerants and resin impregnation using phenolic compounds, early synthetic resins that permanently altered wood's cellular structure, making it more resistant to moisture reabsorption and improving structural properties. The wood that emerged was not merely dried, it was fundamentally transformed. What German engineers did not fully realize was that they were not inventing something entirely new. They were, in fact, rediscovering principles ancient craftsmen had understood through empirical trial and error, processes perfected over centuries then largely forgotten in the age of industrial standardization. Consider the Japanese technique of shosugiban, dating to at least the 17th century. Japanese craftsmen would deliberately char timber's surface using controlled fire, burning away the outer grain while maintaining interior structural integrity. The charring fundamentally altered wood's chemistry, rendering it impervious to rot, insect damage, and moisture absorption. Temples and pagodas built using this technique have stood 400 years, their wooden members still sound and straight. The mechanism reveals a process strikingly similar to German attempts, altering the wood's cellular structure through intense heat and pressure, creating material fundamentally resistant to normal degradation. The Romans employed their own innovations. Waterlogged timbers from Roman construction sites reveal structures deliberately preserved in anaerobic conditions, submerged in water or buried in peat, cut off from oxygen. Under these conditions, decay-causing organisms could not survive. Yet simultaneously, wood underwent chemical changes, rendering it durable and stable. Roman builders understood through centuries of observation that wood could be preserved not by fighting nature, but by harnessing its counterintuitive processes. Even medieval craftsmen of great cathedrals and ships developed complex seasoning rituals. They understood that certain woods benefited from smoke exposure, specific moisture conditions during drying, and layered protection during curing. The knowledge was encoded in guild secrets, passed from master to apprentice, and refined across generations. When the Industrial Revolution demanded standardization, much of this expertise was, well, abandoned for simple, scalable methods. The parallels are unmistakable. Whether through charring, submersion, heat exposure, or chemical treatment, the underlying principle remains constant. Wood's vulnerability to moisture, decay, and instability could be transformed through deliberate intervention. To understand the breakthrough, we must descend into the molecular reality of wood and water. Wood is not a solid but a porous network of hollow cells. These cells hold water in two forms: bound water, locked within cell walls, and free water sitting in cavities. The ratio determines, well, everything about the wood's behavior. Freshly felled wood has, saturated cell cavities. As air drying occurs, free water evaporates first. A few weeks can reduce moisture from saturation to, about 40 to 50%, but the process then slows dramatically. Bound water trapped within cell walls resists evaporation with stubborn tenacity. German engineers recognized that accelerating this final phase was, honestly, salvation. At elevated temperatures and humidity, cell walls swell slightly, creating pathways for bound water to, readily diffuse outward. The saturated steam environment prevents the wood surface from becoming hydrophobic, the water-resistant state causing surface drying to accelerate while interior moisture remains trapped. Instead, there is equilibrium. The surface dries just fast enough to create a gradient, pulling moisture from the interior. The entire timber thickness dries in a coordinated, uniform manner. What took weeks is now compressed into hours. Yet this breakthrough should have transformed the world. After the war, it should have revolutionized construction, furniture making, and timber-dependent industries globally. Yet it largely disappeared, fading into classified archives and academic obscurity. The answer lies in three historical forces. First, as Nazi Germany collapsed, technical research was captured by Allied forces and dispersed. Researchers were scattered or recruited. Knowledge became fragmented across military intelligence files, remaining classified and inaccessible to civilian industries. The technology lost urgency in peacetime reconstruction. Second, the post-war era witnessed a profound shift in material preferences. Aluminum and steel, liberated from wartime rationing, became materials of choice. Aircraft transitioned from wood to all-metal designs. The urgency driving wood-drying innovation evaporated overnight. Third, German methods incorporated processes that modern environmental and occupational safety standards found deeply problematic. High-temperature processes consumed significant energy. Chemical impregnation involved phenolic compounds and formaldehyde derivatives now understood as hazardous. By the time this technology emerged from secrecy, industrial calculus had shifted toward synthetic materials that seemed cleaner and safer. Additionally, there was technological embarrassment. The breakthrough was too closely associated with Nazi Germany. In the post-war world, there was profound cultural aversion to adopting German wartime innovations. Gradually, as researchers retired and documents accumulated, institutional memory faded. Yet the innovation did not truly disappear. It evolved and became embedded in modern timber engineering so thoroughly that we no longer recognize it as German wartime breakthrough. Modern plywood manufacturing relies on rapid kiln drying and heat bonding technologies, tracing direct lineage to World War II research. Engineered lumber, cross-laminated timber, laminated veneer lumber, glulam beams, all depend on accelerated drying techniques developed during the war or refined from that foundation. Marine laminates, requiring dimensional stability and moisture resistance, employ vacuum and pressure drying techniques that are direct descendants of German innovations. The perpendicular airflow concept, revolutionary in the 1940s, is now standard in modern kiln design. Engineers speak of cross-flow drying as well-established principle, not innovation born from desperate necessity. Steam-tight kilns that seemed almost magical are now commonplace in modern timber processing. What vanished was not the technology, but knowledge of its origin. The methods survived and thrived, embedded so thoroughly in industrial practice that their revolutionary nature became invisible. The story of German wood-drying technology is ultimately about human resilience and necessity's extraordinary power to drive innovation. When survival was at stake, when margin between victory and defeat seemed to hinge on production speed, engineers created what nature said was impossible. They compressed time, defied ancient rhythms, emerged with methods that should have transformed civilization. That these innovations were largely forgotten tells us something profound. Technologies do not simply disappear, they transmute, evolve, become embedded in everyday practice until we forget they were revolutionary. Thank you for joining The Lost Tactician. If you found this exploration compelling, please like and subscribe for more deep dives into wartime innovation and hidden knowledge that shaped our world.